They also run in text with the same parent of the friend from Exhibit 105, the friend's mother, when Jennifer Crumbley reaches out to her saying she had no clue what they were going through with their son, and she felt really bad about it, and asked how they're all doing, and that they're thinking about them, that family, a lot. And ultimately, the worst that Jennifer Crumbley says about her son is, I know my son misses him, and if you need anything at all, don't hesitate to ask. That's it. It doesn't go on with wild depressions or hallucinations or mental health issues. That's it. That's it. I'm actually shocked there's not more instances of depression or moodiness or my kid is acting weird. The fact that there's this little evidence is shocking to me. However, it's a lack of evidence on the state's part. There's also a lack of evidence in Mrs. Crumbley saying he's depressed to really anyone else. Even after the shooting, when she's talking to her friend Kira, to other people, to Brian, all she keeps saying over and over is, I wish there had been signs. I wish there had been something. He's a normal kid. There's a complete lack of evidence of mental health concerns specifically. If you want to really spend some time digging into this, you can read all the messages between James and Jennifer Crumbley, all of them, and you will find that there are not texts that go on and on that their son was exhibiting anything close to a mental health concern. And again, my text would read worse because I say things like, I think my daughter's psychotic. When Mrs. Crumbley did have to evaluate what's going on with her son, and there was something alarming happening, she relied on people who spend day in and day out with kids, people she considers to have more expertise in kids than she does, including Pam Fine, who left her a very nonchalant voicemail that you've heard, that was Exhibit 115 if you want to hear it again, saying Ethan was looking up bullets in school today. It's not illegal, it's not wrong, he's not in any trouble. It's just like how teachers can't look up hops for beer. You don't need to call me back. She was relying on the representations by the school counselor, Sean Hopkins, who took the stand and has had a lot of training, hundreds of hours of training, and made it very clear this was just an issue where he needed some kind of therapy and didn't think it was necessary to suggest to the Crumbleys, go to Common Ground today, or serious enough that he called 911. And she relied on the assistant dean, who also has an abundance of experience Mrs. Crumbley doesn't have. And quite frankly, my kids didn't come with a handbook, and my guess is her son didn't either. And the assistant dean said the same thing in the meeting with Mr. Hopkins, that Ethan Crumbley that the son could remain in school that day, that he would probably be better off, according to Mr. Hopkins, around peers versus being alone, and that as long as they got him an appointment within 48 hours for some kind of counseling or therapist, that was sufficient. So it's absolutely not credible when a witness from the school, like Mr. Hopkins or Mr. Ejak, gets up on the stand and says, even if a kid is very sick, we cannot force them to go home. That is not true. And as parents with common sense, you should know that's not true. Because when my kids are puking, my kids' school will not let them be there. And when they have a temperature, not only can they not be there, but my children's school is always nice enough to remind me they can't be there for the next 24 hours, which means they can't be there the next day either. So reasonable doubt can be found in the fact that trained professionals told Mrs. Crumbley her son was not a risk, and Mrs. Crumbley relied upon it. This school also failed to even really look at the situation and tell her about things from the year before. They made it very clear that he was not in any kind of discipline issue, which is shocking to me and was shocking to Mrs. Crumbley, considering he's off school. He's looking at a video in school of some kind of violent pictures, and then he draws a gun on his math paper instead of doing the math paper. So when school officials say, okay, this is really not a big deal, all we want is a counselor within 48 hours, Mrs. Crumbley took that as a very strong sign that things were fine. And reasonable doubt can come from the fact that those 3 people at the school, Fine, Ejak, and Hopkins, are mandatory reporters by CPS who would have reported if they thought Mrs. Crumbley or Mr. Crumbley were neglecting their son. Mrs. Crumbley even commented to others about the nonchalance that was at that meeting, that it was only 12 minutes long, which surprised her, that she was disappointed they didn't take it more seriously, that she was surprised there was no disciplinary action, and she left the school actually feeling better that maybe she had overreacted when she flew over to the school. Now, the people who are trained in these areas, they didn't just say, we're not trained in these areas. They gave specific examples. They said that kids who are really a threat, they would show nervous behavior. They would show anxiety about somebody else handling their belongings. In this case, the shooter was cool as a cucumber as Mr. Ejak went down, got his backpack with the gun in it, and brought it to him. And Mr. Hopkins and Ejak said they hoped they could get him into counseling today, but ultimately said he can stay at school and we'll give you 48 hours to get it situated. All right, so the prosecution keeps harping on the fact that Mrs. Crumbley knew they had bought a gun and that the people at the school didn't. This is Oxford Community Schools. These professionals testified about how common guns are at the school, so common, and this kind of blew me away, although I live out there, that students are known to go to the gun ranges often, that girls on homecoming wearing their short little party dresses they wear to the dance take photos before the dance holding their guns, that kids go hunting on Late Start Wednesday before they go to school, and the school has to give reminders to parents for people to leave their guns at home. So this school that obviously has a strong gun culture going on, that sees a student looking at bullets, looking at a video game type thing with violence, and seeing a gun drawn on a paper, that these school officials, knowing that community, that they didn't ask if he had a gun when they carried the backpack down, and did make a comment about how heavy it was, although the comment evidently was made to a different teacher, and I misunderstood and thought it had been made to the shooter.